So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part two of the Sankofa Collaborative's tribute to the semi-quincentennial. We have a series of programs that will be running from now until 2027. This is part two of the African American story of the Great Migration from the South to the North and the West of African Americans during the late part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century. So just to recap for some and to introduce to others, the Great Migration was without a doubt the greatest internal movement of people from one section of the country to another. That it began with a trickle at the conclusion of Reconstruction or Civil War and Reconstruction, and did not end until the early 1960s. I know that some historians might say that it did not end until the 1970s, but most consider the end of Jim Crow came somewhere after the 1954 Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. Others consider the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act as the end of Jim Crow. And others just might say that we are still in a period of Jim Crow. There's a bit of truth in all three schools of thought, considering what is going on. And I'm getting political, which I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it. What's going on in Washington, D.C. today, I don't know where we are, to be perfectly honest. New Jersey's participation or place in the Great Migration is significant. You will hear part of the story today, but I think from the guests that we have, we'll be talking about the Great Migration in general terms of the country, and specifically the Northeast, but you will hear a bit about New Jersey, or specifically the story of Newark, New Jersey from me. Our largest city played a significant role in that episode of American history. Next slide, please, Charlie. So again, welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. We will have a Q&A at the conclusion of remarks from all of our panelists, who I'll introduce shortly. So again, to recap for those of you who might not have been with us for our first session 2 weeks ago, at the conclusion of the Civil War, the country went into a period of Reconstruction. Remember that the overwhelming majority of the people of African descent were in the South, working on plantations, as well as working in cities, in factories, in stores. Almost every institution that required some kind of labor had enslaved people who were with them. We commonly think of what Hollywood tells us, that they were all picking cotton. Some of them were indeed picking cotton or other involved in another form of agriculture. But factories, businesses, small businesses, large businesses, households, all involve the ownership of people. Most of them were not taught to read or write, so their skills were limited. Reconstruction sought to find new ways of giving those recently freed skills so that they at least could be somewhat autonomous in the greater society. Well, at least that was the vision of some of the Northerners, but enslavement did not exactly end with the end of the Civil War, and it certainly almost came back full throttle at the end of Reconstruction, because what the society came up with was that the majority of people who had been held in bondage were relegated to doing the same kind of work for very, very little financial compensation up until the period of the Great Migration. And even that was complicated, because we know that even today in 2025, all people are not considered equal. We may call that equal under the law, but it is in fact not equal, which is a whole subject for another series of programs that we shall be doing. But by 1877, when federal troops were removed from the South, we went into a period that is commonly referred to as Jim Crow, which was simply slavery by another name. As Jim Crow, or as the acceptance of Jim Crow grew, the newly freed African Americans, or those of African descent, found the conditions intolerable in the South and came to the conclusion, urged by progressives such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Thomas Fortune, Mary McLeod Bethune, and others, that they began to plan their move to the North, where they felt they would have a greater degree of autonomy and where the shackles of slavery or the remnants of slavery were not in existence, as we learned last week. This was not exactly true, and we will explore this afternoon ways in which many of the people who migrated from the South found that conditions were, if not as poor, certainly not as good as they were for others that dwelled in the North. The next slide, please. Most scholars believe that the mass exit from the South to the North began in the last decade of the 19th century and reached its peak in the late 1920s and early 1930s. There were several routes that were popular from people leaving the South going to the North, and this map illustrates those routes. Those that populated New Jersey, moved to New Jersey, usually came from the Southeast: Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. Those who lived in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, basically traveled to the Midwestern cities of Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, etc. And of course, those who lived further west, perhaps in Arkansas or Texas or Louisiana, went to the West Coast: Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, even as far as cold and sometimes dreary Seattle, Washington. Next slide, please. In New Jersey, the cities of Newark, Camden, Paterson, Jersey City, Atlantic City, Asbury Park were attractive places for migrants to land. Newark felt the impact the greatest in our particular city. And there's a favorite story that goes around. I don't know how true it is, but I've heard, I don't know how many people say it when talking about the Great Migration. Many people came up by train. And it said that when the conductor said Newark, New Jersey, even though their goal or their aim might have been landing in New York City, Harlem in particular was a favorite place, they got off the train in Newark and found themselves stuck here. But without a doubt, Newark received the greatest number of migrants. For a number of reasons, people did stay here. One was the size of the city was navigable, and even though some of them may have gone to New York City after landing in Newark, they came back to Newark because it was a little cozier, a little bit more adaptable than New York City. People are still moving to New Jersey from New York for that same reason. It was also a big industrial center. There were jobs here. Factory work was available to them. The housing stock, at least in the very early part of the migration, was comfortable and was more affordable than New York City. That's still true, the affordability of living in Newark. So they stayed here. Soon things changed around quite a bit, and they found that conditions in the North, and Newark included, were not as comfortable as they had been led to believe, because even in the North, a form of Jim Crow existed. Next slide. Okay, that's what the Newark train station might have looked about like in 1935, the new train station that still exists today. And this just goes to show you how much the population of the city increased during that time. In 1910, the Black population in Newark was about 9,475 people, according to that census. And just 20 years later, in 1930, the Black population had increased to 38,880. So you can imagine all the problems that were caused because of that very sudden or that very rapid increase in people. And the city was nowhere near prepared for that in many ways. One way is that racial attitudes in Newark or in the North were basically just as bad or as complicated as they were in the South. Charlie, can you go back to the slide before this again? This is near the intersection of Broad and Market. Those of you who know Newark probably recognize the old Prudential building in the background. And that corner on the left part of your screen, those buildings are still there, and that corner pretty much looks just the same, except the buildings are a little bit more run down. This is the intersection again of Broad and Market, and in 1922, the New Jersey state office for the Ku Klux Klan was located in the intersection of Broad and Market. So that tells you just how liberal, I put in quotes, the city of Newark was during that time. I should also add that when migrants arrived during that time period, segregation on public transportation ruled. So the segregated sections may not have been as run down as they were in the South. Nevertheless, they were clearly labeled, and the segregation rules on public transportation were clearly enforced. And I'm going to end my opening remarks with a quote from Frederick Hoffman, who was an actuarial working with Prudential, and that's the Prudential in the background. Prudential was a mighty force in Newark back in the 20s and 30s, and even before that, just as it is now. And their chief actuarial agent said, and I quote, "The Southern Black man at the time of emancipation was healthy in body and cheerful in mind. He neither suffered inordinately from disease nor from impaired bodily vigor. His industrial capacity as a laborer were not of a low order, nor was a condition of servitude such as to produce in him morbid conditions favorable to mental disease, suicide, or intemperance." In other words, they were happy, they were healthy, right? And they were satisfied with their lot in life. What are the conditions 30 years later? This is 30 years after emancipation. And he says in the report that I took this from, "The pages of this work give but one answer, an answer which is a most severe condemnation of modern attempts of superior races to lift inferior races to their elevated positions. An answer so full of meaning that it would seem criminal indifference on the part of a civilized people to ignore it." His language, plain language of facts brought together, the colored race, is shown to be on the downward slide, tending toward a condition in which matters will be worse than they are now, when diseases will be more destructive, vital resistance still lower, when the number of births will fall below the deaths, and the gradual extinction of the race takes place. In other words, we were so much better off in slavery that our condition in freedom is going to annihilate all of us, because we can't be happy and we're not healthy in freedom. So I will leave you with that quote to ponder as we listen to the wonderful guests that we have with us today. I'm going to just briefly introduce them now and give you a little bit more information as we go on. Dr. Gretchen Soren is the Distinguished Professor of Cooperstown Graduate Program at SUNY Oneonta, and author of Driving While Black, African American Travel and the Road to Civil Rights. Dr. Vivian Cox Frazier is President and CEO of the Urban League of Essex County and on the faculty at the Center on Law, Inequality, and Metropolitan Equity, Rutgers Law School. Ms. Vicki Donaldson is an attorney, community activist, and all around, how can I put it, go-to person when you are in trouble or in need of any kind, including if you just need to feel better about yourself and a laugh. Ms. Rosalind Zinga Vaughn Nickel is a mixed media artist and paper maker whose many exhibitions include For the Culture, by the Culture, 30 Years of Black Art, Activism, and Achievement. And we will have go first Dr. Gretchen Soren from New York, who's visiting us today. At the end, I should add for the audience, we will have our Q&A. We will let the presenters present and then go into a Q&A period when they've all finished with their remarks. Dr. Soren.
Thank you. So I was asked to talk about the challenges faced by travelers as they traveled north from the south. Travel becomes central to the African American experience with the ordeal of the Middle Passage. So the idea of forced travel shapes what it means to be an African American. The very earliest police forces in the United States were forces that were established to find enslaved people. They were slave patrols. They guarded communities at night, and they kept enslaved Africans from leaving their plantations. So people were stuck on their plantations. They couldn't run away, and that becomes one of the reasons that African Americans find travel very appealing when they are freed. These are plantation badges, and you can see that they look exactly like modern police badges. They come from that tradition of slave catching. These are the slave catchers' badges. So in the early 20th century, African Americans are willing to put every single thing that they own, strap it to their cars, get into buses, trains, whatever kind of transportation they can afford or they can find, and move to the north. And this is a particularly important image because it's family with everything strapped to their car going to Cranberry, New Jersey. Transportation throughout the country was segregated. Buses were segregated, trains were segregated, and here you can see the train car in the back. It says colored on those back seats. This is what the interior of a segregated train for white people looked like. This is a slide of African Americans traveling by train, and you can see how crowded the car is. These cars were rarely cleaned. The bathrooms were filthy. They were overcrowded, and it was really unpleasant to travel by public transportation. So African Americans preferred automobiles, and they bought automobiles in large numbers, whether they could afford used cars or new cars. They bought automobiles. And they bought specific kinds of automobiles for very specific reasons. This is an advertisement for the Buick Electra. I call it a rolling living room because it was so comfortable and it was so large. And it says, all the Electra Limited lacks is a fireplace. African Americans chose big cars when they bought cars. And they chose big cars because they were harder to turn over if you encountered an angry mob, and also because they were comfortable. And you might have to sleep in your car on the way north. You wouldn't necessarily be able to sleep in a hotel. You wouldn't necessarily be able to eat in a restaurant because those two were segregated. And so your car becomes your safe space and a rolling living room. This slide, I'm sorry it's so dark, but it demonstrates the kinds of gear that everyone carried. They carried picnic baskets. They carried water for the radiator. They carried blankets and pillows for sleeping in the car. Cars had to carry lots and lots of possessions whenever African Americans went out on the road. And so the automobile becomes a very special place for African Americans, and it becomes the African American safe space. And as African Americans are now going out on the road, they're leaving the South, they have to crisscross the country, and they're finding that they have to go from safe Black spaces into and across dangerous white spaces. And it was very important that they be very careful. This obviously is the famous Chuck Berry with his Cadillac. But many white Americans were angry at African Americans owning fancy cars, even though obviously Chuck Berry could afford a Cadillac. They didn't like Black people owning Cadillacs, and sometimes that could create a very dangerous situation. But going out on the road, you were encountering very unpleasant, both psychologically and physically, unpleasant situations. This is a "Welcome to Klan Country" sign, with a car passing it in Alabama. This is a sign for um, the Coon Chicken Inn, which was a nationally famous restaurant chain. You can imagine how African Americans felt, their kids in the back seat, encountering the racism that you just saw on the side of the road. This is the sign across the road, Main Street in Greenville, Texas. Greenville, welcome, the blackest land, the whitest people. And there were literally thousands of sundown towns in the United States across the country. And a sundown town was a town that a Black person could work in, but you couldn't be in that town after sundown. So you can imagine if you were traveling from the South to the North and you drove into a town that had a sign like this that basically said, you better not be in this town when it gets dark. And of course, some African Americans actually encountered real dangers. There are instances of people turning the corner and encountering a Klan rally, or encountering someone in the process of being lynched, or someone in the process of being burned by a Klan, a group of Klansmen. And this slide shows a Colorado Ferris wheel, the county fair. You can imagine stopping in Colorado and seeing this when you were traveling. Of course, the Negro Motorist Green Book was a little guide that African Americans carried with them. There were dozens of these guides. The Green Book was just the longest lasting, but you needed a guidebook like this to tell you what hotels and tourist camps, where you could find a place to get your car fixed, where you could find a restaurant to eat, where you could find a place to buy gasoline. And it was developed by Victor Green and his wife, Alma. Alma was very heavily involved in it. We don't talk much about her, but these guidebooks were really important. And in addition to these guidebooks, you also had advertisements in newspapers, in the Black press. You had advertisements in magazines that told you places that would be welcoming, and places you could stay for the night. It's a typical ad just showing you Esso gas stations generally were the only places that along the road allowed African Americans to use their restrooms. And so African Americans always bought Esso gas. And there were a whole variety of types of places that you could stay. This is a tourist home in Kittery, Maine, called Rock Rest. But these were places that were welcoming to African Americans. This is a luncheon at Rock Rest. And there were along the road motels that you could just pull in with your automobile if you were driving. And there were also large hotels like the Hotel Teresa, which is actually, it's no longer a hotel, but it's still standing in Harlem in New York City on 124th Street. The ads in these books were designed to make you feel comfortable. Often they have the photograph of the owner, so you can see that the owner is African American. You would know this was a possible place to stay, where you would be welcome and feel comfortable as you were traveling. And of course, restaurants too. You needed to find places along the way that you could eat. And this is Dookie Chase's. It's one of the few African American restaurants that's actually still in business today in Louisiana. I wanted to end with this cartoon because it really shows how we've come up to the present day, and we still have the residue of this time period when it was dangerous for African Americans to travel. And this is a cartoon that appeared in a newspaper, in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, um, about the relationship between African Americans and the police. Be courteous. This is if you're stopped. Obey all lawful orders. Have license and registration ready, and avoid being black.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. I think, is Vivian Cox Frazier with us yet?
Yes, she's here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I already introduced you before, but thank you for being with us.
I need no new introduction. Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I think, well, I was asked to speak about the conditions that migrants found when they came to Newark. So the Urban League was founded in 1917 by William Ashby, who was the first Black social worker in New Jersey. And prior to William Ashby joining as they used to call the leads of the Urban Leagues at that time, secretaries, before he joined, I just want to just share that the Urban League was founded primarily as a mutual aid society, right? So this community of leaders here, of African Americans and others in this community, saw that the migrants were coming north, and they needed things, they needed help. They really weren't adjusted to urban living. And so the Urban League was founded at that time as, in a sense, a mutual aid society. And so I actually have, what I thought I would do is share. So this document here is the actual archives. In the archives of the Urban League are the minutes of the meetings that they would have when they found it. And actually, it's kind of interesting because you hear the stories of the families they were serving. And at the time, the Urban League was founded. It was called the Negro Welfare League, right? And so the mission of the league was to improve the social, economic, and moral conditions of the new arrivals who found that discrimination had followed them northward despite the greater opportunities. So many people came north in search of opportunities because really the American dream, achieved success, hard work, determination, and initiative. And they came through places, urban communities, on train lines, and they ended up here in Newark. And so about more than 100 years ago, leather factories, ironworks, breweries, and other factories thrived along the Morris Canal. And Black workers streamed into this area from the South, escaping Jim Crow oppression and drawn by the plentiful jobs and available housing stock. Now, what was the housing stock? The housing stock was really substandard housing. So I'm going to read a few of the stories. What I would do is share some of the stories. So I pulled out of here some few examples. There's an article in January 9th, 1917 in the paper that, cooperation is the key to Negro welfare. And they had 100 people who joined together and say we had to, improve the conditions of the migrants coming in. So this is an example, and they would have meetings, and when they met, they would speak about specific families who needed help, which I think is really, the hallmark of how the Urban League started. So this one speaks of, this was March 1, 1917. It's of the Williams family, and I guess the father, Grant Williams. So Miss Pendleton reports that a man and two boys were living at this address of 170 Academy Street. The woman had been taken to the hospital and died there. The man is now sick and dead with a very heavy cold. They have not had a change of clothing and have no food. The man has $16 coming to him from Swift's, which is a processing plant, but has not been able to get it on account of being sick. So Miss Robinson, who's part of this visiting of the Urban League, visited the family and gave them some food. The man asked Miss Robinson to write to his sister in the South, asking her to come up here to take care of the house and to also write to his oldest daughter in the South, telling her of the death of her mother. And Miss Robinson will continue to visit, and Ms. Holmes will see that the family is receiving food and clothing. So that's an example of just really how the Urban League was founded. And these records are full of stories like that. So there's an interesting one in September of 17, because September 17th, 1917, it says that Mr. Ashby, who was the founder of the Urban League, was asked to make a few remarks, which he did, expressing his deep interest in the work to which he has been called and his belief and determination that it will succeed. So they asked him to make a statement. He said, well, Mr. Ashby was asked by Mr. Hamburg to make a statement as to what he had done so far. Mr. Ashby had not been in the city 2 weeks. He said he had already visited factories and gotten in touch with the employers with permission to speak with the men engaging the new colored workers there to learn the ways of northern factories. Ms. Pendleton then suggested that further discussion be brought forward regarding the office assistants, since the clerical work of the Negro Welfare League has been done entirely by herself and her stenographer, since there's no formation really of the office. And she no longer has time to give this part of his work. But it just shows that, and I think they also have a treasurer's report. It talks about the use of funds, of who they were distributed to for family members for certain things. But as you read some of the stories, there's some harrowing stories about the conditions that they found in place of the families. And so this is a letter. This is also the September 17th report. They had it was kind of a thick report. They had a balance of $101.69. Most of the money was for sending families home who had homes in the South to go to and who had become sick here on account of the cold climate. And a couple of notes indicate that they were telling people, if you have family in the South, don't come, go back. Because the living conditions here were pretty harsh, what people found. They thought they were encountering streets of milk and honey, and they really found tenements with unsafe and unhealthy conditions. And in fact, let's see, I thought I had marked a page, but I read where, the governor and the mayor and had convened a group because they were concerned about all the migrants that were coming north. It was such a wave of them that even the governor's office had said, well, you need to get all the groups that are working on this across the state together to help resolve helping the new arrivals become settled. So, that's just some of the information I was able to identify. But I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have about the conditions. I do have, like I said, some more stories in here, mostly about families that had no heat, no running water. They had to have one of the activities of the Urban League. They distributed about 5,000 flyers around about how to improve health and safety in the conditions, so families would know, like better cleaning and water and things like that. So that's sort of what I had.
Next, I would like Rosalind Nzinga to speak.
I used here Jacob Lawrence work because he was a New Jersey born artist, but I'm also taking sort of a personal view about the Great Migration, and it's a view from the cultural arts. You can go to the next slide. So this is my maternal great-grandmother, Ollie Sena Franklin, and her sister, Rebecca Tanner, and I included Rebecca's in her flapper dress because in the 1920s, even though we were in Indianapolis, she liked to travel to Chicago because she was a flapper. But their mother, Katie, was about 2 years old when her mother, Polly Chandler, when they left the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and as part of this Roberts settlement, which was a group of Black and Cherokee and mixed race group of people that eventually settled outside of Indianapolis. So my family comes from North Carolina, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee. You can go to the next slide. So like a lot of families, my relatives were trying to get to those places, but some people ended up in the larger cities like Los Angeles, St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago, Newark, and Harlem, of course. But many settled in smaller cities or outside um, smaller cities. Next slide. And it's funny, I'm using a lot of Jacob Lawrence's because Jacob Lawrence did over 60 panels that showed a lot of the problems and the promise, not just the promise of the North, but also the problems associated with it. And I invite you, if you haven't seen all 60 of those panels, which I had not until I started looking at them for this talk today, and he really does go in depth with a lot of the things that people were facing when they were dealing with a great migration. Next slide. So this is my paternal grandmother, Frances Coleman, and she's holding her youngest daughter, Carolyn. And Carolyn is the first one of my relatives that was not born south. My grandmother, Frances, came from Haywood County, Nutbush, Tennessee. You might recognize Nutbush, Tennessee, because that's also where Tina Turner came from. And in fact, my great-grandfather, Al Coleman, pastored the Woodland Baptist Church, where her family was a member. And that church was involved, was largely founded by free men in 1866. And from that point forward, Woodlawn was really involved with a rich history of of civil rights activity. And this is sort of important because as an artist, as a young budding artist, one day I did a watercolor and I was real proud of it. I brought to show my grandmother. Was a silhouette of a Black man, and in his brain was a Black figure climbing the steps to turn on the light bulb in the man's head. But he was being hindered by a white figure that was pulling him back by his ankles. And you can look at this lady and see that she was pretty quiet and stately woman, and she kept that demeanor all my life, except when she saw that watercolor, she had sort of a meltdown on me, and I didn't really understand what that was about. But she really reprimanded me. She said, "I don't ever want to see you doing any kind of work like this again." In fact, I don't even have the watercolor because either she took it or somehow maybe her reaction to me made me respond by tearing it up. Whichever the case is, I don't have it anymore. But I think, being a part of whatever work her father was involved in with civil rights and helping families, and then also because she told me one day in an unguarded moment where she was just cooking, and that's usually when she was really relaxed. So she told me how her father Al had put them on the road at night, her and her sister Edna, and told them only to walk at night. And they were leaving Nutbush or Haywood County, Tennessee, to go up to Centralia, Illinois. And so I looked it up, and it would be um, about a 4 hour drive, but it actually ended up to be a 4 hour trip for these two girls walking. So when this lady died, my grandmother died, I was talking to my aunts about them walking up to Centralia. And they all looked at me like I had lost my mind. And I was wondering what it was about. And it turns out she had never told them that story. And that's just how guarded she was about her life and the things that she was willing to share, because obviously she had grown up in a pretty intense time. And that helped me to see why she had such a negative response to my work as an artist. Next slide. So I've been using a lot of Jacob Lawrence's work, as I see a couple other, as Linda did as well, because Jacob Lawrence was born in September 7th, 1917 in Atlantic City. And he was he's one of the important artists of the 20th century because he depicted African American life and history and culture in the contemporary life that they were experiencing. And at the age of 23, he did this panel of these 60 panels of the Great Migration, which probably most of us are familiar with some of them today. But next slide. He was a student of Charles Henry Austin. Charles Austin was another person who was really important to the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance was one of the things that fed into the Great Migration. It was, of course, we know back then it was called the New Negro Movement, related to the book written by Alan Locke, which addressed everything from the arts to fashion, music, dance, theater, politics, and scholarship. And it was actually, I call it like a militant cultural movement. You see Charles Austin here talking to Romare Bearden. Romare Bearden was another important artist of that movement. He was actually born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and when his family relocated to New York when he was a toddler, he would travel back and forth to the South in the summers on a train. And you can see in some of his early works, next slide, how he incorporated that rural life. You'll also see a lot of trains in his early work, because he's reconciling the life in the South with the life up north, because his family was very involved in the Harlem Renaissance, and the Bearden household became an important meeting place for major figures in the Harlem Renaissance. And so that's why you will see a lot of these more familiar works. And then, of course, later on, his works with a lot of cityscapes. Next slide. Another person that was really important to the Harlem Renaissance and the Great Migration was James Vanderzee. He was born in 1886 in Lenox, Massachusetts. And he's best known for his portraits of Black New Yorkers. But he began by taking snapshots of the rural community he knew in New England. But some people may not know that when he migrated first to New York with his family, then him and his family went west, and then they came back. And where they came back to was Newark, New Jersey, where he took a job in a portrait studio, first as the darkroom assistant and then as a portraitist. And he stayed there for 1 year. And we can imagine that that's where he really developed his talent and um, the beginning of his expertise at recording Black life. In fact, um, his work represents one of the most comprehensive documentation of that period. Next slide. I'm sure all of us are familiar with this slide, or most of us probably are, because it's one of his iconic image of a couple in a raccoon coats, it's called, but it's a portrait taken in Harlem. And he took a lot of photos of weddings, of people wanting to mark how they were being represented in the North to send back home to their relatives and to show how well they had made it and how things were going. So he really stayed busy and had a very long and prolific career. He even, got to a place where he would take photos of funerals and pose the person while they were still alive in the photos. And all of this was meaningful to people that were celebrating their culture, but celebrating it through now this visual arts that they could, send back to their families. And I think, you know, it was what the work he did, and not just him, there were other photographers and other artists, but all of this had an important impact on the influx of people that were getting these images back south and wishing for um, a better life in the north. Next slide. The Great Migration transformed Newark significantly, as we've heard from Linda. But the research I looked at said around in 1920 that the population of Newark, New Jersey doubled. And from 1910 through 1970, many artists of different voices and visual arts, music, especially jazz, theater, made their, made important contributions to Newark. And I dare say a friend of mine on the line now here might not want me to say so, but William Mays, he was one of those people who documented the jazz life and a lot of the musicians that came through Newark. And so I say that to say that there's a lot of people. Newark is just such a rich, diverse space of artists and culture, and we see that revival going on again, which I'm so happy about. But I wanted to finish up with Gladys Barker Gower. And Gladys was important because she was the first person to open a gallery in Newark, New Jersey. She was notable for many accolades. But the one thing that I like to share about Gladys is that she was one of the first people that put me in a group exhibition when I came to Newark. And there's something special about Newark, New Jersey. The creative community is a very close-knit community, and I have found it to be a very nurturing place that fosters the arts. And I think it will continue to be that. I mean, it was a place that was an industrial powerhouse for industry and providing work for families to make their lives better. But it also produced, a lot of artists and musicians. Of course, the Newark Arts High School for Fine Arts and Industrial Arts, which was started in 1931, was the first of its kind in the country. And there's a long list of alumni that came out of that school that made major contributions. So that's kind of my full circle moment of kind of the impact that the Great Migration had on me personally as an artist. And of all the places I could have landed, I was happy to have landed here about 25 years ago because it has been a great place to live and work and to collaborate with other artists and creatives in this area. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very, very much. And I cannot believe that it was 25 years ago.
I know. I know.
Can't believe
Time flies.
Yeah. But thank you very much. And our next presenter is our Vicki Donaldson.
I've just been enlightened. I love Newark history. I'll just start out by saying what I probably am most notorious for is the Conklin and Liberation takeover at Rutgers.
That's right.
But I came to Newark about 62 years ago when my mother, in a second marriage, relocated here. She was a nurse and couldn't get work in the South because in the small Southern towns, you only had one Black nurse. And you had to wait for that person to either die or become incapacitated. So she moved to Newark, got a job with Dr. Philip Gear. I don't know if any of you remember Dr. Gear. He worked in the old doctor's hospital. And I ended up at Rutgers because I was supposed to go to Douglas, Miss Linda,
Oh, okay.
But they didn't have any dorm space, so I chose to come to Newark so I could live in Newark.
Mhm.
I came a couple of years before the rebellion, but I was one of the civil rights kids in the South prior to my actual physical relocation to Newark. And I most remember Freedom Summer.
Yeah.
And I was one of the civil rights kids during Freedom Summer. I came to Newark to go to college, but the conditions in Newark allowed me to hook up with Bob Kervin, who was, some of you may remember Bob Kervin. Julius and I will talk about him extensively next week. He was a president of CORE, and Rutgers had hired him in the night school, which was called University College. And he
Kind of
heard
tell
me,
them what CORE stands for.
oh, CORE is the Congress of Racial Equality. In the South, if you were a civil rights kid, you only had the NAACP, which was a little more tame to some of our liking in terms of political aggressiveness. The Congress of Racial Equality, which was headed up by Jim Farmer, and the and CORE actually happened to have an office in my hometown because they were conducting things we called Saturday morning freedom workshops. And one of the local persons had heard me speak out about some of the stuff at the boycotts and the marches and sort of mentored me. So she brought James Farmer to my little hometown in Quincy, Florida, 20 miles from Tallahassee, where my mother apparently had been a protester at FAMU when she was a student there. Fast forward to 1967, the year of the rebellion. I now know Bob Kervin. He introduced me to some of the historic figures in Newark. Irvine Turner, he made me go to council meetings where I had to watch Mr. Turner sometimes fall asleep. I don't know if any of you remember Tiny Prince, people who later on became key in Ken Gibson's administration. Earl Harris, we used to have things called coffee clutches, and Earl Harris and Ken Gibson came to our house. My parents were block captains or something like that. And I got involved in their campaigns. The first one, of course, Ken lost. And the second one in 1970, of course, he won, which was the beginning of our official political activity in Newark. But in 1967, amidst a lot of uproar and a lot of rebuffs, I guess you could call them, by then Mayor Adnizio, we organized our communities in very traditional ways. But one night, about 20 blocks from my house, an incident occurred where a Black cab driver was stopped and beaten by the police, and he was taken to the South District precinct and beaten. Bob Kervin, of course, was the leader of CORE. And there's a very famous picture that you'll see next week of Bob Kervin in a t-shirt trying to quell the crowd that had gathered at Belmont Avenue and Avon Avenue, which is where the incident occurred. And folk were going to march on the police station. And there's a whole story about that. But for the next few days, the rebellion in August occurred in Newark, which changed the whole cultural and political landscape of the city. Bob became, of course, sort of infamous. That shot, which appeared in Life magazine, symbolized a lot of what was going on in Newark. It was a great time if you were an activist. And you gotta, if I could just let you know a little bit about, I have a concluding story, by the way. After the rebellion, we could see in our neighborhoods, my parents owned a house on South 18th Street between Madison and Avon. And at that time, the folk who lived there were quote unquote the middle class, and a few remnants of white folk who had made it to the border and then from there moved into Irvington. If you can see a physical transformation of communities. As Black folk moved in and up, and Clinton up, this is called Upper Clinton Hill. As Black folk moved in, white folk moved out. You will see probably when we look at recent history, the exodus of the middle class also had a great impact on what Newark is today. But in 1967, I came to Rutgers, and the first thing we noticed was that there were none of us. All of you may know Richard Roper. He was the president of the NAACP. Bob Kervin taught a class, and we were his first students. We established an African American Studies department, but we didn't have any students. And we would go to the high schools, Arts High School being one of them. Teresa David was the principal at that time. And I later worked with her when I was a member of the school board. And they told us that they didn't encourage students to come to Rutgers. I know this sounds disjointed, but somewhere I'm going to connect it. The students came because we went to each high school. We were students at Rutgers my first year. And we recruited students and brought them to the university and demanded that the university admit them. They were the top of their classes, and Rutgers said no. We did some demands. What resulted was the takeover of Conklin Hall, where we held the building for about 4 days, demanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the university, in a very dramatic is all I can say, move at midnight, signed some demands that we had submitted, opening up admission to students, all students who lived in any location where Rutgers had a primary campus, Newark, New Brunswick, and Camden. And the populations on these campuses had to be commensurate with the populations of the communities in which they existed. We used that, and Rutgers, as you know, became known anyway as the most diverse university in the nation. And they attributed a lot of that to the demands that we submitted in 1968 and 69, following the impetus created by the rebellion of 1967. The first thing that we had to do was find students, and we did. We got the university to admit 14 Black students. And of those 14 students, 10 became Phi Beta Kappa. I'm really proud of that. I always get choked up when I say that. And moving forward, if we look at the impact of education and the arts in Newark, they sort of blossomed at the same time, or they coalesced at the same time in 1968. When I hear you talk about the Harlem Renaissance movement, we had in Newark something called the Black Arts Movement. In 1968, the year after rebellion and the year before the Conklin takeover, Amiri Baraka, who was then Leroy Jones, Nikki Giovanni, Tony K. Bambara, Sonia Sanchez, Carolyn Rogers, Etheridge Knight, all came to Newark. And they took some of us who aspired to be writers and all of us who aspired to serve our communities into what we call the Newark Black Arts Festival workshops. Out of that has grown, I believe, the culture that today is manifest all throughout the city of Newark, whether it's with murals, whether it's folk who become famous like Jerry Gant, Mrs. Grauer. The Black Arts Movement has transformed the cultural community that we now experience and live in Newark. I know I'm supposed to be talking about something, Linda. I'm trying because I was ready for next week.
You are actually fit that in right fine. I am going to stop you after you make some ending comments and try and tie together what all of you said and then entertain some comments from the audience.
Well, I'll wrap up by simply saying that I think Newark, New Jersey has been and continues to be probably one of the most diverse and culturally rich communities in the nation. It goes back to traditions that go back to the Renaissance and before, that are derived in part from folk who experienced or whose parents experienced the Great Migration. And I'm just glad that I've lived long enough to see this day come about when Newark is considered the Black cultural center of the Black arts movement.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our speakers. As I said, I'm going to try and wrap this up. But one comment first, Vicki. I know from the Scarlet and Black Project, which will be with the program that you're going to do next week, that Douglas College, shortly before I got there, and which would have been the time that you were admitted, did not pay. First of all, in the beginning, they did not allow Black students to live on campus.
Right.
And when they finally started allowing Black students on campus, they would only give you a single or give you a Black roommate. That did not let the races intermix in rooming situations. And if they did not have a single for you, or you could not find a Black roommate, which was difficult to find considering, I think the senior class of my freshman year of 1970 only had about 4 Black students in it. Then you had to live off campus. So I didn't know if you knew that. I wanted to clarify.
That's exactly what I was referring to when I said they didn't have any room.
Yeah. I wanted to bring it out so people would know what would happen.
Right,
but what I would like to say, as far as everyone, I think that we've had a pretty good retrospective or holistic viewpoint of what happened. From Gretchen, we found out the difficulties that people may have had while making that journey from the south to the north, and why something like a green book had to exist so that they would successfully make the trip. We then found out from the Urban Link from Vivian that what people found here, it was not the utopia that they thought it was going to be. What they found here, and about an organization that helped during that resettlement process, which worked for some, but ultimately did not work for others who either moved out of New Jersey and back to the South or relocated someplace else. We then found out from Nzinga that for those who were able to stay in the North and to stay in New Jersey in particular, their way of looking at the world was changed. And they produced artwork which reflected that change. We now had people who were educated, who were learning how to read, and who were told, right, that you don't necessarily have to work on a farm all of your life. You can become an artist, you can become a writer, you can become a teacher. And we heard from Vicki, just the doors were closed to many of them in our higher education facilities, and how the struggle then came to allow people to achieve the dream that they had when their parents or their grandparents moved to the North. I think I circled all of you, pretty much got the essence of what you said, maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, any one of you.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to ask those of you who have questions to unmute. You can either write them in the chat, or you can call out your names. I don't see anyone's face live here. I don't think including my own, but here I am. So that we can, if there are any questions from the audience, we can entertain them.
I have a comment, actually, Linda. I just want to say, as a newcomer to Newark, I'm always amazed. I always learn something new about this town. For all the years I've lived here, it just never ceases to amaze me. And I thank you for this series that you're putting together because I learned a lot today about Newark. And I think the thing that I wanted to say that, artists, we are always kind of, in our own little worlds, but when you relocate to a new region of the country, it's kind of difficult to kind of get in with what's going on. But I found in Newark a very welcoming community of people that not only embraced me and mentored me, but helped me to grow to become the artist I am today. And I'm really glad, however, I landed here, that this is the place I landed.
Mhm. Thank you. I am not, I was not born or raised here, but I'm only from the town right next to Newark, which is Elizabeth. And at our last session, people heard about my family's migration story that was here. But I did move here with marriage 50 years ago. Well, actually 49 years ago. And I'm still here as well. So we came, Vicky, because Warwick, my husband, was attending graduate school at Rutgers Newark, and he was in the MBA program there. Okay, but thank you. We have found it a good place too. We get a bad rap, just as New Jersey as a state gets a bad rap. And people I remember when Dr. Holloway, the current president of Rutgers, I think it was maybe within that first 6 months after his move to New Jersey, I asked him how he liked it here. And he said he and his wife and his children were really expecting something very different. But instead, they found a place that they sort of fell in love with and really liked. And I said to him that he had to learn that New Jerseyans put out a bad rap about New Jersey because we're already too crowded and we don't want anyone else to come and join us. We don't want them to know how good a place it really can be. So you're expressing some of that same kind of sentiment. So I did not look in the chat to see if there was anything there. I will do that now. But if anyone has any questions, just unmic yourself and speak up.
A comment.
Go ahead, Bruce. Go ahead,
you?
Bruce. Thank you. Introduce yourself.
So I'm Bruce Daniels. I'm part of Sankofa Collaborative and also the Vice President of the Stroudsburg Saraland African American Museum in Skillman, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So Linda, I just wanted to say,
which if anyone cares, has a wonderful exhibit on chapeaux, on church women and their hats. And if you can visit the Stroudsburg Saraland African American Museum, first of all, well, I won't go, I'll ask Beverly or Elaine to go in the history of the facility, but I just want to get that in about the exhibit.
Can he repeat the city again? I didn't hear the city.
We'll get back to it.
Okay,
because I'm going to ask someone to tell this group about it. But go ahead, Bruce. I'm sorry.
yeah, I just wanted, one of the earlier comments was about cars and in the South. And I just wanted to comment that when I was a little kid in the 50s and maybe early 60s, we had cousins that lived in North Carolina. And part of our tour was that my cousin, who was considerably older than me, would drive us around into the farmlands and point out, greatly agitated, a shiny black car, sometimes a Cadillac, parked next to essentially a shack in a field. And he was irate about this. And I still remember that from the time I was probably, 8 years old or something. And also in North Carolina in those days, Ku Klux Klan billboards with a big knight on a horse and you're in Klan country were all over the place. So, and last comment is just, I did make it to the Cherry Blossom Festival.
Oh, without me.
I emailed you, but you never got back to me.
I don't think I saw the email, Bruce. I'm sorry. How
I
dare you?
offered to take you out to lunch at Tops and
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm going to think of something else to bring you up here so I can get the free lunch. Go ahead.
the cherry blossoms were great. And yeah, just give me a yell. I'll take you out to lunch anytime.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if one of you, Elaine, Bruce, or Beverly, would just give a little commercial about the Stroudsburg Saraland Mountains African American Museum, because some of us up in so-called North Jersey don't understand that there is African-American life south of New Brunswick.
Can you believe it? There really is.
Yeah, okay.
Tucked away in central New Jersey, right outside of Princeton, in between Princeton and Trenton, in a very, very close proximity. But
they also have a different take on space and distance. We would not call that very close proximity like they do down there. Close proximity is 5 minutes away up here, but go ahead. It's a good half hour, if not more. Go ahead.
Anyway, Elaine Buck and I are co-founders of the Stroudsburg Saraland African American Museum, because when we were researching our first book, If These Stones Could Talk, it just became so shockingly apparent that this area was so rich in African American history, not only because of enslavement, but in literally like everywhere else in the country and New Jersey, built the region. And this is a region with very, very considerable wealth. So, we look at this wealth and say, yeah, this was on the backs of us. So we thought it was only fitting that we somehow thought of in some fashion to start a museum. So there was an old abandoned AME church in Skillman, and we were able to secure that. And that is essentially now where we are housing our museum materials and have our programming. And we also have acquired a farmstead, a historic farmstead, African-American farmstead on the adjoining property, and have also purchased another African-American home on the other side of the property. So we're really proud. We're still brand new. We've only been doing this now for the last 10 years, isn't it, Elaine? Your memory's better than mine, girl.
Yeah.
Jump in.
Oh,
I've
please.
known you. It's been since I've known you. I know. And
Okay.
yeah.
It's 9 years, I believe.
9. Okay. Yeah.
We started in your backyard in 2016.
Yes. Started in my backyard by making dinner and, just talking about how are we going to do this thing. So fast forward 9 years, it's been incredible. And
is this you? Is that your symbol? Is that you? Wait a minute, where are we? Is that you?
I don't know if I can't see it.
No, is it
No?
the green
Wrong
and
one?
red? Is that what? Yeah, You I typed in the chat the actual
Oh, you
name
did?
of
Okay,
the
because I
museum.
couldn't hear them. They were going
Yeah.
so fast. Okay, let me see.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
and then I was gonna type the address, and then I must have pushed the wrong button and it sent, but it's 183 Hollow Road, and it's in Skillman, New Jersey.
But what you need to do is please go to our website, which is www.ssaamuseum.org, because we don't have hours of operation every day. We have hours of operation every Wednesday, Wednesdays and Saturdays. So you have to check which Wednesday and Saturday they're going to be open, so the docents will be there.
I wonder if one of you could talk about how Black people arrived in your area, because that is also a migration story. Just briefly, just talk about, I know you told me about people coming up during the summers for the peach orchards and things like that. Just how people settled in that area.
Elaine, when you talk about your family migrating from the South, because it's mostly.
My family migrated there was Unky and Auntie that live on the all Black street of Columbia Avenue, the east end of Columbia Avenue here in Hopewell Borough. And Unky was here in the late 1800s, and he migrated from Danville, Virginia area, Pittsylvania County. Whether he migrated or whether he was brought up here to work, I still haven't figured that out. But later on, the family actually started migrating, and they would come in a truck by one of the people that came
earlier, John Jones, and there's a big Jones family in Skillman. And so he would go back and forth to Danville, and they would travel through the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I talk about it in our second book, Harmony and Hostility, about how scared they said they were going. And I've been through the Blue Ridge Mountains recently, and it's very scary. So I can only imagine how scared it was for them back in the 1930s and the 40s. But yes, they migrated here to Hopewell Borough. A lot of them came to work on the farms and to work on the railroad. And then I heard the lady say William Ashby, and William Ashby actually lived in the Hopewell Borough, and we talk about that in our second book also.
Yeah.
He actually lived here with a family, his wife's family, and some of these people were actually here. They didn't migrate here. They were actually here, born and raised here in our community. Some of the African Americans, like my husband's family, the Nevius
And my
family.
family.
Yeah, and Beverly's family. So, I mean,
I also wanted to mention that I'm just finding this out. This is a new part of the history, that many of the upper crust New Jerseyans were able to live as they did here, very good lives here, because they owned plantations or farms in the South. And sometimes they would transport some of their enslaved people from the South to the North for special projects or for planting season or something. And eventually, when Jim Crow came, they were already familiar with this area because of being brought back and forth by some of New Jersey's early leadership that were Northerners, but owned Southern plantations and owned Southern slaves.
Now, Linda, and I'm glad you said that because the Stockton family from Morven, that's exactly what they did. And then my maiden name is Hunt, and there was the Hunt family that they had plantation properties here in New Jersey, but they also had some in the South. And so it might look like people had one or two enslaved people on their properties, but they actually owned more than that, but they were down in the South.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to mention, going back to Vicky's story, is that just about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we had a major lawsuit in New Jersey because there was a country club in, I want to say it was still Essex County, but it might have been Passaic, that did not allow Blacks to use their swimming pool there. And two white families sued because they had birthday parties and things for their children. And some of their guests who were African American guests were not allowed to use the pool facilities. So people were coming to a place that was maybe slightly better, but not altogether free of racism. And that's the point that we wanted you to get from our conversation today and as of last week. And Charlie, I think that we're just about at 3:30. And unless there's another comment that needs to come out, I'm going to try and close us down.
Linda, I see in the chat, Vivian asked Beverly, where are you purchasing the homes that she mentioned when she was talking? And I can answer that. The homes are being purchased. They are right next door to the AME church, and they were Black owned. And they had been sold, and now we're purchasing them back, and now they're Black owned. So it's a wonderful, wonderful history. The true farmstead is actually, we just purchased that, and it's actually was owned by Black people. And so now we have it, but the Black people that owned it were descendants from that 13-year-old enslaved boy that was Beverly's fourth time removed great-grandfather.
Yeah.
That we talk about in the Price of Silence movie.
So I'm interested in purchasing farmland. If there's a farm, if you know, if anything comes up in the area that might be farmland, Black-owned farmland in New Jersey, interested in the preservation work in that area.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so I want to thank one and all for joining us this afternoon. We will edit maybe and have this available on our website, the website of the Sankofa Collaborative. Look for that information in our weekly publication that comes out. Also, feel free to use us as a vehicle for programs or anything that you might be interested in concerning African American life and history. Not quite exclusively New Jersey, but we tend to be New Jersey centric in what it is that we do. We've been around now for about 9 or 10 years, happily doing what we do. We're all volunteers for this initiative with other responsibilities, professional responsibilities, but we found that there was a need for information about African American life in New Jersey, and we're helping to fulfill at least part of that need. We thank you for joining us this afternoon. Keep track of the news, the weekly, for any news of any programs that either we are sponsoring or other organizations are sponsoring. Enjoy the warm weather and the upcoming summer, and we'll see you again soon.